What is up, group members? I'm licensed psychologist Dr. J.
I'm licensed psychologist Dr. Kristen Casey.
And I'm licensed psychologist Dr. Jessica Rabon.
It's our 30th episode, and this is all Ask Me, as in us, anything. KBI is not with us, still in the most magical place. But Kate and Jess and I are going to do our best to ask you all the questions, answer all the questions, so settle in, take a seat, and welcome to group therapy.
Welcome to the club. You messed up the intro now. Finally, it's all four of us.
But I feel like it was due in a way. No, I just...
You are finally initiated into the podcast.
Yeah. I feel part now, for sure.
We're just going to jump right in. I'm going to read the first one. Let's do it. Okay, so the first question is from Arlo. They're from New York State. State is in capital letters, and I know the distinction between New York State and New York City. Thank you for the distinction, Arlo. So Arlo says, why do you think some mental health conditions are more demonized than others? For example, NPD or BPD, etc.
Yeah, great question, Arlo. I have a lot of different thoughts on this, but I think in the two that you named, narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, I think it's the presence of externalizing behaviors. And what I mean by that, with narcissistic personality disorder, there can be manipulation, there can be taking advantage of others, there can be acting critical or acting superior than another person. With borderline personality disorder, there can be the classic instability or intensity in relationships, emotional swings, anger outbursts. Like, these things can sort of happen. And I think when you compare them to some other mental health difficulties like depression or anxiety, there's just less externalizing behaviors, meaning there's less behaviors that may impact another person negatively. That doesn't say there's none. There's certainly some in any mental health difficulty. But I think when you're talking about some that get sort of more stigmatized, which of course I hope in the future going on, when people learn about these different things, that we have compassion for all people. But I theorize in the ones that you named, they get stigmatized or demonized more, as you put it, because there's people who have been hurt by these people. Mm-hmm. But again, all of us have the capacity to hurt others, even unintentionally. But that's my theory on the ones that you named. I don't know what y'all think.
That was better than any answer I was going to give, Dr. J. Honestly, my gut reaction was, I think the more stigmatized disorders are also the most misunderstood.
Oh,
so like,
for sure.
I mean, outside of NPD, BPD, I think of like schizophrenia is highly stigmatized, but I also think it's very misunderstood because of how it's portrayed in movies, TV shows, things like that. And I mean, part of it is because typically the disorders, I would argue you all could disagree with me, that are more stigmatized are also rarer. Like, they don't occur as commonly as, say, generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder. So people may be able to relate to those things more than, say, NPD, any type of the psychotic disorders. But I loved your answer, Dr. J. I was like, yeah.
You're just being nice to me because I messed up the intro.
Yeah, we're trying to make a repair here. No, that was a solid answer. And I echo what both of you said. I mean, when I was doing a little bit of research on NPD, and I noticed there's like not nearly as much research compared to like what Jess said, anxiety or even depression. Mm-hmm. So I do wonder if people generally just don't understand like how it could come up. And a lot of times, to Justin's point, like, people mostly observe the overt behaviors that people experience when they have these disorders.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So our next question comes from Anonymous place. Do any of you struggle with your own mental health?
How much time we got?
It's such a good question, though, right? It's a great question.
Is. Yeah.
I think all of us would say yes.
I want to say who wants to go first.
I think
Yeah, I almost feel like there is kind of like this overwhelming sense before I even got into the mental health field that like most people get into the mental health field because of their own mental health.
Mm.
And I think it could be that, it could be a really strong interest in human behavior, really wanting to connect with others, all that stuff. But yeah, I do struggle with my mental health. I see a therapist once a week. We're on biweekly now. I've graduated to biweekly, so it's exciting.
Hey.
Yeah, I've had depression and anxiety and PTSD. Gosh, I've been in therapy for a while, but my own therapist was even saying like when you're in the mental health field and you're in therapy as a therapist, the therapy might actually be longer than if you weren't in the field, just because things come up and you're kind of in the field and dealing with a lot of other things. But I have bad days too. I have really bad days, I have really good days, and then I have days in between.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, my ongoing struggles are with OCD. Having intrusive thoughts is probably the most plaguing of my mental health difficulties. But grief, I've shared many, many times, losing my dad and brother, that impacts me. I don't really feel like that ever really goes away. But I've also had depressive episodes before and gone through trauma, mostly related to both my brother and dad passing. But I echo exactly what K10 has said. Everyone that I know on a personal level who's in the mental health field has struggled, does struggle, works on their mental health. I'm sure there's a unicorn out there. I've just never met them who's like, yeah, I work in the mental health field, and nope, not yet. Maybe they're out there, but I think they're a unicorn. I think exactly what K10 said. Most of us get in because we found some sort of relief recovery path forward through psychotherapy. And it's amazing. I love the intentionality that comes with that, and that many of us are trying to pay it back and pay it forward in a way from the ways that we've been helped.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like K10 and Dr. J, I also struggle with my own mental health. I've had anxiety as long as I know, which probably comes through like the podcast. But and then depression, trauma. I struggled really, really bad with postpartum anxiety. Like the worst anxiety I've felt probably since high school. Seen a number of different therapists throughout my life, been on medication. So yeah, I would echo what Dr. J said and say that pretty much every single person I know that's in this field has struggled at some point. I think it's also important to highlight, like, yes, we are human, we have our struggles, and we are also trained that if our struggles are, inhibiting us from being able to show up for our clients, that's when we have to, take a break, seek out extra support. But I would argue most people go in the field for this. And I would also argue just with the pandemic and being a therapist, healthcare worker during the pandemic, that's impacting mental health, or just some things that we hear or see on a day-to-day basis. Like, even if I'm not meeting full criteria for a mental health diagnosis, I know there are definitely times if my job at the hospital is really, really hard. Like, this was a year and a half ago, probably, where I had 2 patients die within a week. Like, I'm
It's
going to
so hard.
struggle with
Yeah.
my mental health during those times. But yeah.
And it doesn't make you a bad
Anonymous, we
therapist.
appreciate it. No,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate that question being asked. I know we can all laugh about it because we're all open with each other, either through text, voice message. We have
Like, oh my
an
gosh.
active
Yeah.
mental health a chat, and we're all open. But yeah, to all the listeners out there, there is a reason your therapist or anybody got in the field for sure. Another great question here from Anonymous, back-to-back Anonymous. I wonder if it's the same Anonymous. Possibly.
We will never
Could be.
know.
We'll never know. Have you ever had therapy turn into one of your burnout triggers? Like, I swear it helps, but also, like, I don't know, lately it's been making me really tired.
I love this question. I seriously love this because I think it's totally okay to get burned out from therapy. I think being on a healing and growth journey, if you're constantly focusing on improvement and really getting better and growth and reflection and taking feedback, I mean, that's exhausting. I think anybody would be burned out. And I think I always encourage my clients, if you need a therapy break, that is completely okay. If everybody's stable and like we're doing good, if you want to take a week or two off, like that's totally fine. It's you take a vacation from work, why not take a vacation from therapy and just come back with a fresh set of eyes,
Yeah, I think this idea that you should always be doing the hardest, most difficult work in therapy all the time, I think that's a recipe for burnout. And
Absolutely.
I think some perfectionistic people, some really like type A people kind of approach therapy that way. And therapy, exactly like Keaton said, is so difficult. I think sometimes we just have to give ourselves permission of, I'm going to pause my work on that or kind of processing of that for a while. And I'd like to use therapy to talk about this other thing or explore something else. That's okay too. But I also completely agree. Sometimes you pull back for a few weeks and meet up again in a month, like that's completely fine. But this idea that you're just always doing the deepest, hardest work in therapy, I feel like is so unrealistic. And we don't talk about it enough of like that heavy lifting and just continuing going forward isn't going to work for most of us.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. You all did great answering that one.
You know what you added made me
What?
feel a little better about myself. So I'm
Oh,
glad you added it.
you're welcome.
Oh,
I actually, now that I say I had nothing to add, it was interesting hearing that first time. I was thinking of it from a like therapist perspective until I heard the second part. Like, as therapists, has therapy ever been
oh,
one of our burnout triggers?
I didn't think about it that way.
And
So
it can
that's
be too.
it
Like
can
you
be. I
don't,
was gonna,
of
yeah,
course, that can be as well. We know people, whether you're in private practice or you're in an agency where they just give you way too much of a caseload and
yeah.
compassion fatigue is real, emotional burnout. I mean, yeah, I mean, that's true too.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. Kenzie from Illinois asked a sleep question, so I wanted to answer it.
Let's go.
And OCD. So like me
Ooh.
and Justin could
So
tag
this
team
is
this one. And
y'all's.
Jess,
I'll just
I know,
listen and learn.
No, you have a lot to contribute.
No.
So Kenzie asked, I want to develop a sleep routine because I know it is so important for getting enough sleep. However, I have OCD and I'm concerned that my sleep routine will become compulsive. Do you have any suggestions for developing a sleep routine without it becoming compulsive? Kenzie, I appreciate this question so much. And I think what Kenzie's talking about is I don't want to become overwhelmed with the sleep routine. And I don't want it to become almost like this thing that I feel like I have to do in order to get good sleep. And we call that increased sleep effort. And the more sleep effort that we have, meaning the more emphasis that we put on our sleep routine and making things perfect and really, really kind of coming up with a strategy for our sleep routine. And we feel like we can't break it or else we won't get good sleep. It actually causes more anxiety. And when we have OCD or OCD-like behaviors, it's really, really important to work with your therapist because sometimes we don't even realize that it could become compulsive and we think we're doing something good and we might actually be causing more anxiety or stress. So for those out there who are trying to develop a sleep routine and they have OCD or OCD-like tendencies or compulsive behaviors, I always ask my clients to ask themselves, am I doing this because it actually helps with my sleep, or do I feel like it's something I have to do? We have to make sure that it's helpful. I know that you might want to do it because you're feeling like, okay, if I do this, then it's going to be good. But we really want people to take inventory of taking a step back and reflecting on, do I actually need to do my sleep routine tonight? Because you don't actually have to do it every single night. And that's another myth that people talk about. You don't have to engage in a sleep routine in order to get good sleep. It's not a causation sort of thing. But with OCD, I think it is important to have an extra set of eyes, in helping you develop a good routine.
Totally. To me, the balance I see in my mind is specificity versus flexibility. When you're stuck in this very specific, very rigid routine that almost feels draining. my flag is going up. Is this becoming compulsive? Versus a flexible sleep routine doesn't have hard, rigid limits on things, doesn't have a perfect or right way to do anything. It can just be sort of a natural flowing progression of this is where, I start brushing my teeth. This is when I start journaling or I listen to my music. This is when I dim my lights down. Like, again, it has a flexible flow to it where anyone out there struggling with OCD, I know you relate to this, the rigidity and sort of locking upness you feel when it starts becoming compulsive. You can feel it in the body often, that it's not some flexible routine anymore. It's becoming a compulsion. But I couldn't agree more. Everyone's sort of triggers and way that would manifest can look slightly different. So talking to a therapist, working with a therapist on that is so important.
I love that.
So our next question is from Taylor Rose, which is such a cool name to me.
I love
It's
that
one
name.
word.
I love
Taylor
that name.
Rose.
Yeah.
Like Taylor Rose, if
Dub-
you're listening, which I hope you are because you asked this question, you sound like a really cool person just based off your name. And she's from Nevada. So Taylor Rose says, this is a research topic I'm interested in. If I were to get my master's, I have a BS in psych, but do you think there is a correlation between the ability of an inner monologue to certain mental health conditions, such as anxiety? So is there a correlation, or do we think there's a correlation between those that have that inner monologue and mental health disorders?
Wow. I guess the first question would be, do we think people have an inner monologue? Sorry, Justin, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just excited for this one. I agree.
Me too.
I agree.
Yeah.
Like how would we define inner monologue?
That's literally what I was just about to say.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think of an inner monologue as like hearing yourself talking in your head. Like you're not actually speaking out loud, but it's like a dialogue going on, like a voice inside your head, but you know it's coming from inside your head. It's not like an external voice like we would see in maybe some more like psychotic or delusional disorders, is how I conceptualize it. But
Yeah, I've heard people say that they're getting this like play-by-play of their life in their brain.
mm-hmm.
And I thought that like blew my mind because I'm like, what? Like you almost want to, and that's I think a sign that maybe I don't have that. Like there'll be moments in my day where I'm like, a good example, when I'm filming content, I'll be like, last one. Like in my mind, sometimes I'll actually say, I'll be like, this is my last try at this. After this, I'm done. That's kind of my way to not fall into my own compulsive behaviors and perfectionism. But other than that, like I don't have a play-by-play of like, grab your keys, do that. Like you're in your car, like, and so I've had people explain to me, no, there's like almost someone narrating going through their day.
Yeah.
Do y'all
That's
have
so
that?
wild. I guess like I'm caught up because I'm thinking about like, and I might be conceptualizing it wrong, but I'm thinking of like metacognition, like thinking about my thinking. I don't know why I'm like going down that road of like, I'm thinking about my thoughts that I'm currently having. Is that an inner monologue? Probably not. So I guess it really depends on how you conceptualize it. But to Justin's point, like having like that play by play, I don't know if I have one or not. I have to really think about it. But when I think about it in the context of anxiety, when I think of anxiety, I think anxiety is kind of worry or a tendency for rumination or a tendency to like really focus on our thoughts or things that might happen. So I can understand like having that play by play before it happens and maybe getting caught in that in some way.
And I'm interested to hear Jess's thoughts on this as well. But I was almost thinking, I've worked with clients where they have like the other anxiety symptoms and not kind of the cognitive one. Like they feel it in their body, they have the heart racing, they have more of like the physical. But when it's like, what were you telling yourself? They're like, nothing. I just was like feeling anxious all through the body. So like, I wonder, I think it's a great question and a great study. Like I want you to conduct it because I want a working definition of inner monologue, but secondly, I'm sort of interested, but I'm kind of theorizing. I've seen clients out there who are less connected to this sort of cognitive part of anxiety and more connected to the other, like the physical side. So I'm like, is it necessary? I don't know. What are your thoughts, Jess?
So my gut reaction was like, oh yeah, I have one, until you talked, Justin, and talked about the play-by-play.
Me too. Now I feel like I don't have one. Yeah.
And then I was like, wait, but like, I guess the question is, can you have an inner monologue at times? Because I definitely like, when I think about my anxiety, I definitely have an inner monologue or a play-by-play, but it's about future things that I'm anxious about. But then sometimes I do catch myself, like if I'm walking, but this could also just be mindfulness. Like I'll like count my steps. I'm like 1, 2, 1, 2. And I'm like, is that an inner monologue? Or is that just me like attuning to my feet on the ground? I don't know.
I wonder if an inner monologue and self-talk are different. And Taylor Rose, we're just trying to theorize like what it might mean. So I appreciate
I feel like this is a poll
you're getting us to think. It is we should do a poll.
After we release this, do you have an inner monologue? But I can see how it could be related.
Yeah, I can too.
Me too.
Anxiety. Because even like, not even just about future events, I would get anxious if I had a play-by-play in my head all the time. Like, what if I mess this up? What if like, or like I can imagine, I could also see it like with like depression too. Especially if the inner monologue is maybe more critical, but that's then going to like, is it critical self-talk or like, is it inner monologue? Like, this was such a good question. I don't even know if we answered it.
We're excited for the research. We want
Taylor Rose, when you research it,
we'll
feature it on Google Scholar Shorts.
That's right. Yes. We won't just read the abstract. We'll thumb through the results section, the discussion, every section, even your graphs, whole thing. Bree from Florida. How do you make the distinction between someone struggling with intrusive thoughts alone versus someone struggling with OCD? Can intrusive thoughts have an effect on daily life similarly to how OCD tends to, or is that one of the main distinctions?
Justin, take this one.
I was about to say, like, should we punt this to Justin? Do you want to hear our thoughts first? What?
I want to hear your thoughts first.
I don't want to get it wrong.
No, there's no wrong answers. No.
Okay, so I'll take this since K10 doesn't want to get it wrong. My first thought was like, yes, you can have intrusive thoughts that have an effect on daily life that aren't OCD. I would say, because with OCD, and we talked about this on our OCD episode, you don't actually have to have the compulsions. That would be one way to tell the difference. But, and this is where I will say, correct me if I'm wrong, Justin, but there tends to be themes with regard to the intrusive thoughts in OCD. So harm themes, contamination themes, religious themes, versus you can have intrusive thoughts that don't have themes. So like you could have intrusive thoughts about, we always use the example like you're driving over a bridge and you have the thought to swerve off, or other intrusive thoughts that may be more random, not thematic. But I guess now that I'm saying this out loud, if you had those intrusive thoughts that impacted your daily life, I'm thinking about mental health diagnoses functioning as part of every diagnosis. So what other diagnosis would you get other than OCD?
I even jumped in to re-clarify some of my thoughts, and I found there's a good debate about this. This isn't something that's sort of seamless and there's agreement across the board. Some people would argue that intrusive thoughts can be a part of anxiety. I don't know if I conceptualize that way personally. Some people would argue intrusive thoughts can be a part of PTSD. I also don't know that I would conceptualize it that way, but I would have to hear, this was just an article I was reading, but I would have to hear someone's sort of framing of that. Because I think people can have flashbacks. I think you can have anxiety triggers. But I think the uniqueness of this mechanism of intrusive thoughts is exactly like you said. It's this repetitiveness that tends to have themes that if there are no compulsions, we talk about the concept of pure OCD. So for people that don't know, the compulsions are these repetitive ritualistic behaviors that are performed in response to, oh my word. I was in the middle of defining something so important, and we just got dropped in by a very special guest.
I just had to show up because I needed to make sure you guys could keep it together because I didn't think that was possible.
We're actually falling apart actively, so I'm happy you're here.
Yeah.
Wow.
We actually have not kept it together at all.
I miss you, Kristen.
Right. I'm just chilling on vacation. What are you guys doing?
Wow. Well,
we're recording a podcast.
Just trying to help all of our group members.
What's that like? I wouldn't know. I haven't been on a podcast in almost a week.
Can you just give us a top moment of Disney thus far before we break back to these great group members? We just want a top moment. Like, fill our hearts with the Disney magic for a moment.
Oh no, my top moments are listening to all of the parents at 6 o'clock at night losing their shit.
Oh my God.
And everything I am hearing coming out of people's mouths.
There's nothing more magical than that.
There is nothing more magical than an overstimulated 4-year-old with parents who are just like, you know what? Have your 5th Mickey bar of the day. It's fine.
Oh my God.
This is going to be a whole podcast episode just processing everything Kristen witnessed at Disney.
Well,
Parents everywhere are relating to that, though, of like when you're off your routine.
They really are. I'm off my routine, and I'm like, by 6 o'clock, I'm like, I'm done. Give me 5 Mickey bars, and I'll be happy. What was the question?
Yeah, it was a really good one here is, can you have intrusive thoughts without OCD? And so we were kind of debating that. We're getting in the thick of it. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you can. My personal opinion is I think you can. I have intrusive thoughts that are fueled more by anxiety.
There we go.
We were just talking about
Mine tend to be fueled more by that, or when I'm feeling more unsafe, and to be when mine increase. But I don't get them as often.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So like what I usually say is like if I'm laying in bed at night and I hear a bump, I'm suddenly now like going down and I cannot stop the thoughts from coming. And so they're more fueled by anxiety and they go like really dark, like, and it's like that. And so it's not out of nowhere for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good distinction. And I think this is where it gets muddy of like, is that an anxious thought? Does an anxious thought become an intrusive thought? And there's so much unknown here, right? And we try to define things in the field the best we can, but I agree with you. Like an anxious thought can turn into something that doesn't quite feel like an anxious thought anymore.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Could even turn into like rumination too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So
I still kind of want to know. I want to know something cool that's happening down in Disney.
I don't know. It doesn't have anything to do with Disney. I got to go to Legoland and experience them being an autism center.
Yeah,
it's
So
incredible.
that was really cool. So like all of their rides, everything down to like even their elevators have sensory ratings on them. Yeah, and in every sensory rating, like it tells you. So if it's rated like even a 5 or even like a 1, it tells you what about it got to that rating.
Cool.
Wow.
So like
I love that.
Rides, like, you know, my kid doesn't like to get wet ever. Like it's all downhill from there if he gets wet. And so like it'll say on there like may get wet, does have rain on this ride or whatever. And so that's really, I don't know, I thought that was really cool, something different that, you know, Disney doesn't have. But Disney we just did a restaurant today, and they've been super gracious, like with Oliver. Like we go to some of those restaurants where it's like $50 a person and you pay per person instead of like per meal. And so like we went today and we're like, he's not going to eat anything. Like, do we have to pay? And like, no. And like we did a character meet and greet breakfast. And we didn't pay for that, because he wasn't eating anything. Like we've been packing like all of our meals. So yeah, no, that's been pretty cool, but.
That's really cool. I like how inclusive it is.
Yeah, I'm just loving
That's
it.
great.
It was like 85 degrees today, and I was in heaven.
Oh, you like that?
Oh, I love
Hey,
I love the heat.
As someone
And
that
then
lives in Florida, I appreciate someone coming down and not immediately complaining about it. So that was refreshing.
I would.
meanwhile, Jess is in a hailstorm.
It stopped. Oh yeah, yeah, KBI, you were not on the panic text I was sending these two earlier when I went downstairs and there was water in my house because of the hailstorm and monsoon going
What?
on. Yeah. But it was like 90 here today prior to the hailstorm.
Okay.
Justin,
Well,
did you want to finish answering your pure OCD? Or
yeah,
no?
I think we
Okay.
went into some dimensions, but basically I was just saying the difference is with pure O, there's the presence of those intrusive thoughts, which are extremely disturbing, derailing, don't have anything to do with your beliefs, your desires. They're usually counter that. And then the compulsions, which are more hallmark in OCD, are the repetitive ritualistic behaviors done to sort of ease the distress from an obsession or an intrusive thought. But again, a lot of debate on, does pure OCD exist? Are people who have a lot of intrusive thoughts, are they doing sort of their compulsions mentally? So they're just not overtly behaviors. So it's a great discussion with a lot of unknowns. I think I would conclude just by saying this: intrusive thoughts can completely be derailing, in and of themselves, regardless of whether you call that pure OCD, a part of anxiety, a part of PTSD, possibly. But you could also have OCD with compulsions and intrusive thoughts and be a part of that. Again, I think some of the messiness comes up when it's trying to figure out, like, are there compulsions or aren't they? But I think if you're working with a therapist, you're going to get to the core of that, because sometimes it gets pointed out that there's things that you aren't aware of that you're doing in a compulsive like behavior, where certain treatment styles can help with that.
All right. Next one. Anonymous from Iowa. A lot of anonymous today. I like it. Any advice on transitioning from one therapist to another? I've been working with a therapist for 4 years and worked on a lot of trauma recovery work and EMDR, but my therapist is moving, nervous about the fit and the transition of learning how to trust a new therapist. Thank you. It's a good one.
I think it's all about time. It takes time to transition. I think you need to, my personal opinion is, when you transition to that new therapist, is talking about why that transition needed to happen. And making space to, whether it was even if it was a good transition, honoring that transition and even talking about that as well. Because a lot of times we focus a lot on, like, we're transitioning because we didn't like our therapist, they weren't supportive or whatever, but sometimes we have to transition because maybe our insurance doesn't cover, maybe our person is no longer practicing, and still, talking about, hey, like, this really sucks, let's talk about it.
Thinking about, because I know you said one thing is, nervous about fit. What are the qualities of your therapist that you've had for 4 years that really worked for you, that you really liked, that you want to see in another therapist, and try to identify those qualities? I know for me, at least, when I have a intake, I always ask if somebody's been in therapy before, and if they have, I say, what was your experiences like? What were the positives, negatives? And regardless if somebody has been in therapy, I'll ask, like, what qualities do you look for in a therapist? Because some people, need a very direct therapist. Some people want somebody that is more like soft in their approach. And I would also, since you said that your therapist is moving, see if your therapist has any recommendations of therapists whom they think might be a good fit for you based on working with you.
I love that. I was going to add that, asking your therapist for a recommendation. And I always think, like, to Kristen's point, I think it's so important to create space in your new therapy session to process the transition, because, it's kind of like, okay, I'm done with this therapist. Now I'm moving on to another one. And it could feel clunky and kind of awkward, if you have residual feelings.
Okay. I love you guys. I'm going to go enjoy.
I love you.
No, don't leave before answering this question.
Oh,
we
God.
have to send you out on this now. All right.
Okay.
It wasn't my turn to ask it, but we're keeping you here until you answer this. Jess from Cypress, California wants to know, if none of you were in the mental health field, what else would you be doing and why?
I would probably be an event planner.
Ooh,
that.
you'd be
You
so
would
good
rock
at that.
I
You
can
would
see
rock
that.
that.
Girl, like
Yeah.
be like an event planner, like a trip planner, like because I'm like crafty as shit.
Yeah.
Yep.
My wedding was fun. All of our parties are always like, my son has like minute details, like the food has names on his party. Like that would probably be what
You planned
I
our
can,
main trip, which was 1 year ago today, the day that we're recording.
That's
Oh
crazy.
my God.
yeah, you coordinate people so well
Yeah.
and bring
Mhm.
people together so well. So I feel like you kind of do that already in a way.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, my answer is kind of like sort of the same. I've always loved acting. I've always loved film. So like I would love to do anything in that capacity of like telling
Mhm.
stories and doing those sort of things. And I kind of feel like I sort of do that poorly, but I try. But those are things I'm interested in.
That was some
You do not do it poorly.
like slide negative self-talk there.
The look
Stop
I'm
talking
getting,
about my friends.
the look I'm getting from K10 hurts my soul.
You talking shit about my friend. F off.
Yeah, I know.
I'm kidding.
What about you all?
This one's gonna throw you guys. I'm really, really, really into art. So I've always wanted to be a traveling artist, and my family thought that was bullshit. So that's why I didn't go to art school, because they were like, "Oh my gosh, like you're really, really gonna do that?" But I'm really creative. I just don't like use it anymore because I'm just so busy. Yeah, I would be a traveling artist if I wasn't a
What type
psychologist.
of medium?
Yeah,
Like, what
I
do you
was about to
like?
say, hold up, we need more
Yeah.
details.
Yeah, so I used to do a lot of abstract oil paintings. It was like my thing. Yeah,
Come
and
on.
I know. And for
Do
a
you have
while,
any on
I
hand
was.
to show us?
I'm personally offended that I know nothing about this. Kate,
I am
She's
too.
literally leaving to go find an oil
Drama.
painting.
Okay, here they are, but I just moved, so I will show you guys after I unpack them. But they're everywhere in my house. Yeah, I'm like obsessed.
We're gonna hold you
Obsessed,
to
but-
that in another episode. In another
will.
episode,
Yeah.
we're gonna bring this back up.
Yeah, that's what I would do. What about you, Jess?
Wow. So when I used to answer this question, like when I was in grad school, I used to say I wanted to be a wedding planner because I loved planning my wedding. But honestly, now at this point in my life, I would probably do something in like nutrition dietetics
Yeah.
instead.
I could see you
Um,
doing that.
Yeah.
Such a wealth of knowledge.
I love
Thank
it.
you.
I thought she would want to be an encyclopedia.
Merriam.
I just want to
Well,
be
not
a
Merriam-Webster,
research
but-
paper.
Yo, Google Scholar.
It would be published. It would definitely be published.
Okay. I love you guys.
Okay. Bye, KBI.
Love you, miss you.
All you group members next Tuesday to keep these guys back in line.
Have fun.
Bye. Oh, I missed a great opportunity to roast her right there. I should have said you wouldn't know if we've been out of line because you don't listen to the podcast.
Oh God.
Dang, that would have been such a good burn.
I'm leaving that in. I'm leaving that in.
She won't
my
know
God.
because she doesn't listen to it.
You won't even know.
Yeah. Okay. So our next question comes from Taylor from Ohio.
OH, I was mid-sip. I was like trying to gargle through the water and be like, OH. Hey, Taylor. Howdy.
So Taylor says, first of all, love the podcast and everyone's TikToks. Why do you think people don't believe someone's struggles and or symptoms, such as depression and or suicidal ideation, are real until action is taken or about to be taken? For example, it seems as though when someone reaches out for help, they are seen as needy, attention-seeking, or dramatic. Although when they don't reach out for help, that they are then asked, why didn't you reach out for help? It just seems like a never-ending cycle. Thank you.
This is a good one.
I feel like that's the stigma, right? Like in
Yeah.
the polls that you just described. Like, I agree. I think people who are not very knowledgeable about mental health like to play both sides of that card of like, oh, you don't really need that mental health help. Like, is that really worth your time or your money? And then when someone's really suffering, it's like, yeah, they hit you with the other side. Exactly. Of like, well, why didn't you take care of yourself and go get some help? I hate that it's that way, especially the front end way of like, you taking care of your mental health in any capacity is an honorable and important pursuit. People sort of
Yeah.
mocking that or minimizing, or why do you do that? But then it's like when people are completely burnt out and at their lowest, it's like, yeah, a lot of people can stomp on them. It's like, make it make sense. I hate both sides of that.
Me too. And I think a lot of it too is like, I always go back to, it might be a projection, because you existing and having mental health issues and really, really, really struggling with that. If anybody's going to make you feel bad about that, or they're going to say you're dramatic or you're needy, that says more about them. I know this is so much
Yeah.
easier said than done, like to actually resonate with this, but it really says a lot about that other person. Because if you think about it, if you're reaching out for help, or someone is struggling with something, you would think that the most empathetic response would be, what can I do to help? Like, I'm so sorry you're experiencing that. Like, let's figure it out together. But when somebody thinks that another person is needy or dramatic, in my mind, to Justin's point, they either don't understand or they haven't met themselves in a way where they've been able to hold space for their own experiences and really understand what it might be like. And it's just so I'm getting so angry. I get so aggravated about it too, because I'm like, people are allowed to struggle, and it doesn't mean that they're dramatic, or it doesn't mean they're overreacting. Like, when people are saying things, a lot of times they are minimizing what they're going through just because of the social norm of not talking about this stuff. I got to cut myself off because I'll keep going. So.
No, I think that's so well said. Yeah. I was just making sure we answered all parts of that question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope, in all forms that people can become more aware of mental health and their own mental health, that will stop. Because I think if you're aware of your own struggles and you've worked on things, you've reflected, that's just not a behavior you're going to do. I can't put that another way. You're not going to call anyone dramatic for getting help. And you certainly wouldn't squash someone for hitting a bottom, because truth be told, none of us know when that might be coming for us. That's sort of the unpredictability of life. No matter how well we're doing, we can all have something major happen in our lives and things go downward. I think that's just part of human in life, that there's some suffering that's inevitable and unpreventable. And it doesn't mean we can't do anything about it after it happens. Of course we can. But yeah, I'm with you on that.
I think the only thing I would add is, and I'm hyper focusing on the term attention seeking, because I think that is something we hear a lot, especially as somebody that works primarily with teens. Like, think of self injury or like other things. Oh, they're just attention seeking. And I always go back to, I hate that term, but even if they are quote unquote seeking attention for something that they don't truly have, there is something going on that they feel like they need help with. So even if somebody does not believe they're truly suicidal or depressed, like, one, we're not one to make a judgment on somebody else, but two, if they're coming to you or saying things or doing things and your response is they're attention seeking, they're seeking that attention for a reason. Whether it is true suicidality or something else going on. And I always try to like frame that to especially the parents and guardians I work with, or even just like teens, if they bring up somebody in their life, oh, so attention seeking, like, what is underlying that? Why does this individual do or say those things? Because there's something underlying it that they're needing help with. And it might be the only way that I'm thinking more behaviorally, with like self-harm or more maybe erratic or harmful behaviors. And if people just label it as attention seeking, like there's something that they need attention for.
Yeah. There's some unmet need. I go back to like our instinctual behaviors too. Humans are one of the only species that their first knee-jerk reaction when they're right out of the womb is to cry for help, So I think like we stigmatize that as we age, and it's so weird to me to even have needy as like a term to describe a human being. It really just doesn't resonate for me. Because if somebody's being needy, I'm so happy they are. Thank you for
Totally.
voicing your needs. Some people aren't able to do that. And if somebody has the wherewithal to voice like, wow, I'm struggling right now, I'm really in a really terrible place, that's a strength in my mind. And I think most people might be jealous of that. So I always think about, our reasons for reaching out for help, like Jess is saying too, behaviorally, it could be an instinctual need. And for any of our listeners out there who have ever been called needy or dramatic, you voicing your needs doesn't say that about you. It says a lot about that other person.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I think it's K10, right?
Is it? Who?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, whoops. Who read that
I
one?
messed this up out of
Because
order when I read
Justin messed up the
yeah,
order.
I did.
Oh, fuck. Okay. My bad. I
You're
didn't
good.
pick up on that. Okay. Cool. Jess from California. Oh, fuck. Sorry. Take this part out. Fuck. I'm so
No, you're
behind
good.
here. Okay. Robin. Okay. Robin from Iowa. My therapist and husband both tell me I spend too much time, quote, doing the work of therapy, reading about my diagnoses and theories, listening to podcasts and videos, etc. What are your thoughts on this topic, and how much do you think is too much?
Huh.
It's a really good question. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's interesting it's coming from your therapist and husband. Like,
That was my gut, that both your therapist and husband are saying this.
I would ask for specifics. I mean, because they have different perspectives. And so
Yeah.
I'd ask specifically, what are they concerned about? What are they noticing? I mean, in general, I don't think the work of self-improvement, of growth, is usually a negative thing. In the context that I could see it a negative thing is if people were shutting other aspects of themselves, their lives, and just almost like putting their diagnosis under a magnifying glass and being like, I am OCD.
Yeah.
Have I seen that? I've seen that. I've definitely seen that before, where it's like, yeah, having a diagnosis and struggling with something, I certainly relate to that personally. And I'm a lot more than a diagnosis, of course. There's so much more to my personality, my goals, my dreams, my cultural background, that I think that's the area I could see it sort of being a problem, where so much of my identity is wrapped up in a diagnosis. But in other contexts, I have I'm curious. Like, I'm curious what they're noticing.
Me too. I sometimes observe that when people are in therapy and they're really interested in their diagnosis and they're really, really interested in learning more about that, and just say their partner or their friend or just people in general aren't on the same path, they might
Mm.
see it as, hey, there's this
Mm.
overextension of like, you're putting so much time and emphasis on this, But if it's coming from a therapist too, then I wonder sometimes it's not necessarily an overcorrection, but sometimes when we focus on it too much, then it could feel like I don't know. I don't even think now I'm taking back what I'm just saying, because I don't think there's a way to focus on it too much. But I think to Justin's point, if it's impairing functioning, like for some reason, if it's getting in the way of the relationship or something like that. But I would imagine that if people have a social support network, that they would be pretty supportive of like, hey, let's learn more about this. Like, how can I help and stuff like that. I guess it would depend on the specifics. We need receipts, Robin, we got to figure out what the specifics are,
Totally.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is I can see it being unhelpful if you're reading, researching, watching YouTube videos, kind of to understand the diagnosis more, but then not applying practical skills to like work through it. And I'm not saying that's what you're doing, because like K10 said, we need receipts, we need clarification. But like I can definitely see, and I can think of clients that I've had that will like research a diagnosis over and over again. So they can like give me all the textbook of it
Yeah.
and more so like intellectualize it rather than like feel and process through it. And like is doing quote unquote doing the work and doing all this holding you back from actually moving forward or through your diagnosis or learning ways to cope with it or the situation that you're going through. Yeah.
Totally.
That's such a
Eleni?
good question.
Eleni? Is it Eleni? Eleni. Eleni. How can I buy a vowel? Can I buy pronouncename.com? But anyways, Eleni from Jersey. What's the difference between LAC, LPC, LCSW? We can throw in an LP in there. MFT. You say, I get them so confused. Listen, I totally hear you.
Mm-hmm.
Who can break down this alphabet soup for us?
Do you want me to take it, or do you want to take it, K10?
The only thing I know is LPC is licensed professional counselor, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's all I know.
And LAC is licensed associate counselor, and LCSW licensed clinical social worker. So a licensed associate counselor. And the other thing, I guess, to back up before I say this, the three of us are psychologists on here. We're called psychologists regardless of what state we're in, as long as we are licensed. Every state has different letters
Ugh.
when it comes to other like master's level clinicians. So a licensed associate counselor is a counselor that holds an associate license, which means that they have completed their training, usually have passed a licensing exam of some sort to get the associate licensure status, but are accruing their licensure hours under supervision. So depending on the state, it might be they need to accrue 3,000 clinical hours before they can get fully licensed. So they can practice therapy under somebody else's license. A licensed professional counselor, licensed clinical social worker are individuals that have full licenses, if those are the only letters, but just different branches of the mental health field. So a licensed clinical social worker has a master's in social work, got their supervised hours under a licensed social worker, got their licensed clinical social work degree, because there's also LMSW, which is licensed master's social work. So you haven't completed all of those clinical hours, I believe. I could be wrong on that. And licensed professional counselor is licensed as a counselor. So completed all the requirements for grad school, exams, licensure hours for their state. Yeah. And you threw in LMFT, right, Justin? So licensed marriage and family therapist. So once again, fully licensed, completed their hours, but their degree is in marriage and family therapy. LP, licensed psychologist. Us here, we went to school, did all of our hours. Yeah.
I think we know a lot of the alphabet.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing is no matter what letters you have near your name, this is the advice I usually give out, is it's cool to find someone who has some sort of expertise or experience in what you think you're going through. This is where I agree to a certain level. We use self-diagnosis. Like we might not know for sure that we have, OCD, PTSD, whatever it might be. But if you think enough, I would seek someone out who has an expertise or at least a lot of experience in treating that, because that'll at least start you down the road. But I'm less concerned, like I tell people all the time, I'm less concerned with the letters next to someone's name personally.
So Jocelyn from Ohio.
OH again.
That time.
Come on.
She asks, why is grief so up and down? I recently lost my best friend. Jocelyn, I know I'm sorry doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry for your loss.
It's really hard. I think I'll just speak from my own experience because grief is so different for everyone. For me, grief comes in different waves and it comes in different forms and intensity, and it depends on a lot of factors. It depends on like where you are in life, it depends on the things that you have going on. But I think the key for me is that I just set this expectation with myself that grief never goes away. And the reason for me that I don't necessarily want my grief to go away, even though it's painful, is because then I have the opportunity to create new memories with the person by thinking of them and remembering them and including them in on my dialogue and including them in on my day. At the same time, it's a double-edged sword because it's incredibly painful to experience these things, especially when it comes to grief. But I think it is so up and down because there's no solution. There's really no solution, and there's no way to fix it. There's no way to make it feel better. Anything that everybody says to you can't fix it, can't make it better. And even if you find some peace within yourself, that peace might feel fleeting sometimes. So I don't have a real answer, but that's just my experience.
Yeah, I agree. And I think death and dying, no matter what spirituality or religious or non-religious views you may have, it's the ultimate ending for now. And what I mean by that is it completely changes the narrative path that you're on. Because for me, this existence of my brother, of the person I go on ventures with, the person I can call up and bullshit with, the person that I know at any time is like down for a great time and we're going to be laughing. When someone dies and that's over, there's no cushioning that.
Mm-hmm.
It's I have to completely write a new chapter without that person in my existence. And so things come up that remind you that they're no longer here again for now, whatever your views may be, but they're not here in the same way. And it's extremely difficult. No matter how many years pass, like I still wish I could hit up my brother and we could go skateboard together. And even when I'm like teaching my son how to skateboard now, I'll think about him and wish, he was a text message away and was about to come over. It just never goes away. Never.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, a big thing that I've noticed is there'll be times that you feel like you're doing okay, and then something out of the blue will spark a memory. And I say
Totally.
spark intentionally instead of trigger, because it doesn't have to be a negative thing. And
No.
usually we use the word trigger as like a negative. Spark a memory. Or for me, one thing I've noticed about myself over the years and going through loss is even if cognitively I feel like I'm doing okay, my body remembers things. So November is a really, really hard time for me. I've lost a lot of people in my life, or they've had birthdays and things like that in November. And without a doubt, every November, I just feel worse.
Yeah, it's tough.
And yeah, I mean, I echo everything you all said. Like it stays for a long time. There's a quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but it's something along the lines of like, grief doesn't get smaller, our world around it just gets bigger. So when the grief first happens, your whole world is consumed with grief. And as time goes on, that grief still remains the same size, but you learn how to move on, not in like a sense of forgetting them, but go about your daily tasks. But that grief still remains that large size. Yeah. And so there are going to be things that trigger it and memories. And for me, I know it's just really helpful, like to let myself cry, to let myself feel the things.
Yep.
Because I also truly believe that it wouldn't be so hard if you didn't care so much.
That's it.
True.
That's it.
Wow. Yeah, and grief is so multifaceted too, because I think the thing that sends me a little bit is not only the grief of the loss for me and another person, but the loss for them and their life and their future. Yep. It's like another layer of like, what could their life have been for them, just personally, just for them, and kind of missing out, being on the sidelines, observing those things for them. That's what like sends me sometimes. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So whenever I think it's like getting easier, sometimes I'm just like slapped in the face again. I'm like, oh, well, shit. Okay, there it is, because there's just so many different ways to think about it. And there's just so many ways in which grief affects our lives. And even if we just think about the connection in general is just, there's such depth there. So that's why I think it's hard too.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think as you both mentioned, I think there's just so many ways that like you honor their legacy and you just start writing a different chapter. But that difference doesn't mean you're not going to have memories pop up. And sometimes I'm laughing about things, my brother said and my brother did. I'm like telling hilarious stories. And other days I'm crying. But I completely agree with what Jess said. I think the thing I've learned the hard ways over the years is like, just don't resist the emotion. embrace
Mhm.
it, because exactly, it just shows the love and the connection you had with that person.
Oh yeah, I love that. All right, Amy from Dublin, Ireland. I want to visit there so bad. I heard it's really fun there.
For sure.
My father has just been diagnosed with cancer. I love him, but I'm also processing how badly he treated me as a child in therapy, and how I could find common ground in feeling love and processing anger towards his past deeds. Thanks for a very interesting podcast. I love listening each week. Amy, I really appreciate your question. And
Mm.
I know, sorry, it doesn't go a long way, just like Jess said, but, holding space for you with the diagnosis.
Mhm.
And I think duality exists. We could love someone so much, and we could also hold space for the fact that we're really angry. Both can exist at the same time.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to say, that
Mm.
you can love someone and be upset with how they treated you. And this doesn't apply for every person, every situation, but a lot of times when I'm working with individuals, obviously when I know more of their story, we work on separating the behaviors from the person. Like, you can be
Mm.
very angry at how he treated you and recognize you did not deserve that treatment, and still hold space that he is your father. And um, you know, think about, can I process this while also, you know, moving forward with our relationship, especially, I don't know what type of cancer, if it is going to be a terminal cancer, like, how do you want your last months, years with him to look? And is that something you can work towards in therapy as well? That doesn't mean excusing his behaviors. Obviously, you need to do it in a safe manner. I don't know what your relationship is like now, but yeah, recognizing he is your dad, you can love him, and he did some bad things and you didn't deserve that. And that's okay. You can hold both.
Yeah, totally well said. Sydney, out in Arizona, can each of you share when you decided you wanted to get into mental health and what made you want to go in that direction? Yeah.
It's a good one. Who wants to go first?
Yeah.
I can go first. Oh, okay.
No,
You can
you
go
got
first,
it.
Justin. Okay.
You got it.
So when I decided I wanted to get into the mental health field, and what made you? So I decided my end of my sophomore year of college. So I was already halfway through college. So prior to that, I can't remember if I shared this on the podcast, but I was a chemistry major. I decided at age 12 I was going to be a chemistry major and go to pharmacy school. And then my
What?
freshman, yeah, oh
I
yeah,
can
I
see
had this
that.
I
I
can
can
whole
see
see
it
life
it.
too.
plan. Whole life plan was gonna, yeah, major in chemistry, go to pharmacy school. I loved chemistry.
Mm.
And my November, speaking of November of my freshman year, my cousin died by suicide. And that, other than the birth of my daughter, has probably been the most impactful event of my life.
Mhm.
And so I got back into therapy. And then I started volunteering for a nonprofit, Mental Health America, started working on their crisis line. And all this time I was still like, I'm going to go to pharmacy school, and I'll specifically focus on like mental health, like pharmaceuticals. And then I took a intro to psychology class my second semester sophomore year to fill a gen ed credit. And I was like, nope, this is what I'm supposed to do. So I switched my major
Wow.
to psychology. Shout out to Dr. Einstein. That was his name, his actual name.
Wow.
So
hmm
impactful. Wow.
He's the reason I switched. His class was 8 a.m. and I loved getting up to go to it, which now makes sense. I get up at 4, but back then I was not an early riser, and yeah, decided I wanted to go and study suicide, and that's what I did throughout grad school. I thought I wanted to go into research, but obviously I do clinical work now. But yeah, that's the short of it. So what about you, Justin?
Yeah, I felt like my main thing was just I took general psych in undergrad, first semester, and I felt like it gave me a lot of answers to why my brother was the way he was. My brother had bipolar disorder. And it just gave me a lot of like clarity of like, oh my gosh, like this is what he struggles with. This has a name. And from there, like through undergrad, I just kept taking a ton of psych classes because they're all just so fascinating. And I was also doing a lot of broadcasting, taking broadcasting classes. Then after undergrad, I moved out to LA. I tried to get into acting. And the moment like I knew like I was on the wrong path for me, I was in a very, very deep depression in LA, trying to break into like the acting industry. And I met with my mom, came down because she was worried about me because I was super depressed. And I just had a moment that I knew. I was like, this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing. Like I just felt it in everything in me, and I was trying to force it. And so that, yeah, the rest from there, I moved back to Ohio for a little bit, worked in a research lab, applied for grad school, and kind of went forward from there. But from that point, like my dad died in undergrad, my brother died right when after I had made that decision that I wanted to go to grad school for psych. It was like so ironic, it's the only word I can name. Like I had like made that decision. I had just gotten back from LA and he died from a drug overdose while in Ohio. So I was like, well, I was supposed to be back for it. But yeah, in the ways that I had been helped, how much I love therapy, how interested I was in psychology. And then you go down a path that you just know, like I know those of you listening who have felt this, like you just feel it in every part of you. You're like, I'm not, like, this isn't for me. As much as I might want it in certain ways, like I'm not supposed to be doing this right now. So what about you, Ketan?
Oh, both of your stories are so beautiful. It was weird. I was an EMT for 5 years. I thought I was going to go into the medical field. And growing up, I've always like had this deep, deep, deep desire to like help people and all of that. Come from a pretty chaotic childhood. So I was always like the helper. It was just like a natural thing for me. And I was always interested in psychology. So I went to school, but I didn't have any intention of becoming a psychologist. I just kind of stayed in school just because it was like the only stable thing I had going for me at the time. So I was like, let me just continue this and just take classes. And the classes that I happened to take were psychology classes. And I was on the ambulance and I just noticed I distinctly remember this. There was one client who was experiencing a psychotic episode, and the cops and my other partners on the ambulance, that while they were so wonderful, nobody knew what to do with the crisis calls. And I was like the crisis person. So anytime anybody was having like a psychotic episode, or maybe they had a drug overdose and they were scared, or they needed someone to comfort them, or they really needed like strategies, or somebody was like super, super angry and they needed to be like calm down, essentially, I would be the person there to do it. So I just had this like natural knack for it. And I just thought like, oh, I'll just become a physician and all that stuff. And then when I was in school, I was in my bachelor's program, I decided to retire, and I put it in air quotes, like retire. It's only been 5 years, but that's what they call it in EMS. Retired from EMS, and I just decided to do psychology like full force. And it was weird because I realized on the ambulance, the thing that I was missing the most was like that deep connection with people, because I would help these people and then I would never see them again. And I would think about it I still think about those clients that I had on the ambulance. Like it's just unfinished business in my mind, and I'll never know. And it used to keep me up at night. So got into bachelor's program. And then me and my husband were in Jersey, and I just wanted to get away. So many trauma triggers for me. So we just decided, let's move to Phoenix, Arizona. We both didn't have any jobs. We moved over there. I worked under an LPC for a bit, and then I got into a doctorate program. I literally applied and I was like, I hope this works. And then I ended up getting in. That's literally how it happened. Because I just needed something stable, and I knew school was something that I could rely on. Once I was in my doctorate program, that's where everything kind of came together. And I was like, this is it. Like I knew, like first class of my doctorate program, I was like, this is it. I finally found my calling, and it was like such a relief because I'd been searching for so many years. And the thing that I love the most is when I do therapy, it almost feels like a creative art as well. Like you don't really know what you're going to expect from the therapy session, and you could mold it any way that you want, while also using like mediums and putting it in air quotes that are rooted in research. It's a beautiful experience in my opinion, but that's kind of how I got into the field.
Love it. So Emily from Los Angeles asks, I'm a first-year clinical psych doctoral student and starting supervision soon. How can I prepare myself best besides my own therapy?
Oh, do you remember your first year?
Yeah, do I?
Yeah. We all share your anxiety, Emily. We get it.
Yeah, I think my best advice is like don't shy away from the hard questions and supervision. Don't shy away from showing, the tape where you're like, I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember being a supervisor, I remember being a student very well, and in both, like in student, like when you're the student and when you're the supervisor, when someone is showing you a highlight tape.
Mm-hmm.
We all need to know what we're doing well, for sure. But you will grow far more by saying, I don't know what the hell to do with this. And you play that audio tape, videotape, whatever you got, and you're like, help me. I grew the most from that vulnerability. And vulnerability is hard for all of us. So yeah, getting your own therapy is great. But I hope you take advantage of having someone with years of experience over your shoulder helping you to be like, show me that part that was so hard for you. I want to see it. Please take advantage of that.
I love it. I echo everything that you say. And I think you're a student because you don't know everything yet. You're there to learn, not to know everything. And your biggest strength will be asking for help, because when you show a level of humility and you show a level of like, I really want to learn, and you're like a sponge, you create the best version of yourself as a psychologist, because your clients are going to teach you about their life all the time and they're going to correct you, and they're going to give you feedback too of like, no, I think you got it wrong on this end. So I think being able to not only take feedback, but then also really, really, really be open to the idea that you're never, ever, ever going to know everything. And that's part of the process. And getting comfortable with not knowing is like the hardest thing. But if you go into it, like Justin's saying, and like really, really soaking it up, that supervisor was once in your shoes too. Like the field itself is built on people who have been there before you and people who are going to come after you. You know what I mean? And we're all just in this together. So I know imposter syndrome might set in too, but you got this.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, kind of along the lines of the same thing K-Tem was saying, is letting go of like expectations and perfectionism. Because I remember being like so anxious about my quote unquote performance, because it's taped. Supervisor watches it back and be like, oh, I messed this up. I messed this up. And I remember one supervisor in particular that was like, no, you did that great. And I was like, what? No, I didn't. I didn't do that. And she's like, it's not about like executing the manual perfect. And she was like, if the only intervention you can do is sit and hold space, you are still doing something. And yeah, you're not going to know everything. And you're being supervised because the expectation is that you're not perfect. There's so much room for growth. And getting feedback can be hard. I would argue most people that get, into graduate school that far in life, go into this field, have a certain personality. I mean, we all have different personalities, but usually very high achieving. It might be harder to hear some feedback that you don't like, but use that as, ways to grow. But yeah, let go of perfectionism. You're gonna screw up. We all still screw up. Like there are so many times I say something and I'm like, in session now, I'm just like, I'm sorry, that made no sense. Let me just back up and try again.
Totally.
Yeah.
I just defined that totally wrong for you. Let's go back. Let me just pull out this manual and
let's
teach you.
Let's run it back. Yeah.
No, I do that all the time. Like literally the other day I was like, I can define this for you, but I'm just going to pull it up on Google to make sure I'm defining it correctly. And my patient was like, okay, cool. Like, yeah, letting go of perfectionism.
Yeah, people want to connect with a human. Like, don't forget that part.
Yeah.
We found that out during our AI episode. People don't want AI for a therapist, at least for now. We found that out. We listened to the episode before this if you don't know what we're talking about.
Unless it's Ex Machina, then I mean at that. No, I'm joking. No.
Nightmares.
I can't. All right. Bradley from the UK. I've seen online recently people talking about intellectualizing emotions instead of sitting with them in the moment. What does this actually mean, Bradley? This is an amazing question.
This is a great question.
Yeah.
Who wants to take it? You want me to take it?
You got Jess.
Is this pointed? Are you saying that I do this? No, I'm just kidding. Well, I do this.
Three
So when I
psychologists
think
in a room. What does it mean by? Sorry, go ahead.
when everybody looks at one person, when I think of intellectualizing emotions, I think of using like logic to reason through them rather than actually feeling the emotions. So instead of sitting with the emotions, sitting with the anxiety, the pain, the discomfort, you're in your brain cognitively trying to rationalize why you are feeling this way, why you shouldn't feel this way. All mental health providers hate the word should, but I just used it. And for many people, like they can logic themselves out of emotions, but it's an avoidance tactic because then you don't never like actually feel or experience the uncomfortable emotions. So then you're never working through them. But I would love to get y'all's thoughts.
That was a perfect answer, honestly.
Okay. We were talking about not
Yeah.
being perfect like 2 minutes
True.
ago. Okay, 10.
True.
Yeah, I think Bradley, a lot of men can do this, but people in general can do this, where they'll be like, they'll tell you what happened as if it happened to another person. It's very like they're telling you the narrative of it with being disconnected from it. Like yeah, I was so disappointed. Like I didn't get the job, and it kind of bummed me out. And then I was like wandering around, and it's like, okay, wait, let's slow down. And so stereotypically, a lot of emotion-focused therapists get shit for this in different ways, but they'll be like, tell me about that disappointment. How did you feel that disappointment? Where in your body did you notice it? But the reason why this matters, and again, we all laugh, and I like that question, because what it makes you think about is, how do you experience disappointment? Why that can be important is it allows us actually to flush it out, express it, and connect it to previous emotional experiences. What does this feeling of disappointment remind you of? Reminds me of growing up when my dad, nothing was ever good enough. And every time after being in the car, after the baseball game, I would feel the same. Look where that led. But when you talk about something like it's a narrative, like it just the facts of like what happened, that emotion still is there and it lives inside of you. And you did not sit with it and get curious about it and almost welcome its full experience of. And again, I see this a lot in men, but I see it a lot in women and other people as well.
Yeah. I love both of your answers. I even think, just to add to it, I think a lot of times people intellectualize because they feel uncomfortable with experiencing the emotions, because who wants to? I mean, who wants to, right? It sucks. But I think, like Justin saying, that emotion will live inside you, even if I think emotions come up to come out, I like to talk about them. And I think if you're describing what's happening, you and one other person can experience the same thing and maybe describe it very similarly, but the emotional part makes it unique for you. The emotions that you feel and how you connect it and how you might relate it to other things in your life. All right. I think we're taking it home. So
many great questions, though.
I know.
Wow. I love those.
I know. It was so fun. Well, group members, our time has come to an end. We'll be eliciting some feedback from you because it's our 30th episode. So exciting. So head over to our Instagram this week and tell us your thoughts. We'll be posting something. And feel free to answer our last reflection question too. How do you feel about AI in the mental health field? We're going to talk about that next week as well. Yeah.
I'm so excited.
Oh my goodness.
We've already got some really good answers.
I know. I can't wait. I literally can't wait. But as always, we really enjoy your questions, and thank you for giving us an opportunity to spend time with you whenever you listen to this, wherever you are. We're so happy that you're here. And feel free to rate, like, share, and subscribe, and share with a friend. And we'll see you next week in group therapy.
Bye.
Bye.